You're listening to the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. We believe the Bible doesn't need to be watered down or cleaned up to be understood. Our goal is to provide a healing place to discuss the questions you can't ask and the context you won't learn in church. I'm your host, Colin Connor. Now, on to the episode. Welcome back, everyone, for what I am sure is going to be a very unique and memorable episode in our podcast. We have been doing an ongoing series on faith, food, drink, spirituality, the intersection of all that. As I was prepping for this, I had been listening to another podcast. A friend, Andrew Camp, Biggest Table, has been here a part of this series already. And he had on Anna Rollins and started talking with her about a new book, Famished. And I had seen a little bit on social media advertising the book through just having some similar connections. And as soon as he started talking to Anna and brought up how he has this heart for, talking about the table and inviting people in, and then just brought up, but there can be a dark side to that too. And sometimes when food and faith are combined, that's not always a good thing. And as I listened to that episode, I just had this light bulb go on in my head. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's so right. Why didn't I think of that? And I said, all right, we need to make an addendum to our series immediately. I ran over to Instagram, messaged Anna. It was like, you don't know me. Congrats on your new book. I need you on my podcast. And she graciously responded quickly and agreed. So we are really excited to have a new guest on today, Anna Rollins. She describes herself as a lifelong Appalachian, or do I have to say Appalachian? What's correct for you there?
I think insiders say Appalachian and people outside the region say Appalachian. So
yeah. I grew up here in New Jersey, so it was always Appalachian until I went to Bible college in North Carolina, and it was Appalachian. So I'm like, all right, I guess the people that live there know it better.
Yeah, either one.
So she is an award-winning English instructor. I saw online, West Virginia Creative Network Literary Arts Fellow, which impressive. And we have her here today because just a couple months ago, released this book, Famished. Normally, this is where I would hold it up, but I had it on Kindle, so I am looking here at my other screen. Famished on Food, Sex, and Growing Up as a Good Girl. What a title. Anna, we are glad to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I was so happy to receive your message, and I loved that conversation at Andrew Camp's The Biggest Table. So I'm really excited to talk with you.
Me too. When I saw this book, I was intrigued because there's plenty of Christian conversations out there that talk about food, focusing on like discipline or health. But as soon as I realized your book is coming at this from a very different angle, it's treating food as a theological issue and pairing secular dieting culture and Christian purity culture and saying that they're almost like two sides of the same coin. So I had never heard this before. I was fascinated. I grabbed the book and I told Anna right before we started recording, I have a hard time saying I enjoyed the book. I appreciated the book. And here's why I say that. Growing up in fundamentalism, she portrayed this so well that as I was reading it, I was going, oh my gosh, this feels like exactly what I experienced. And there were even a couple of times where I had to stop and be like, oh, this is pulling up stuff that I didn't realize it was going to do. So she is a very good writer and really brings in a whole perspective that I would just recommend to you. I know I'm doing a huge intro here. Usually I'm into the conversation first, but stay with this conversation. Even if you say, oh, I've never gone on a diet or struggled with disordered eating or didn't grow up in purity culture, like this is going to be a really unique conversation that I'm excited to have. And I think Anna has some really good insights. So I just want to get started off here saying, what is it that got you to a point where you would say, I'm going to write about both dieting culture and purity culture? Like that's a really unique niche. So how'd you land on that?
Yeah, well, it was because I had no other choice. So I studied creative writing in college, and whenever I would go to write anything, if I wasn't like going at it with an agenda, it was usually about my relationship with food, my body, and God. And then I would get too embarrassed to turn it in. I would think no one wants to see this. This is like petty girl stuff. And so then I would write something else. And often that something else wasn't very good. But I finally, after years and years of not really writing what I wanted to write about, I decided to just let myself go for it. And I didn't realize that I was writing about purity culture and diet culture until
Mm,
after I'd written a lot. It was like that was the marketing afterward. When I
mm,
was just writing it, it was very organic, and what was coming up was just this obsession with feeling like I was just my body. God only cared
mm,
if I controlled my body, and trying to figure out how I could be an agent in the world who had desires and who wanted to pursue things like, and even how I could really live out my faith in an embodied way, having received those scripts as a young girl. So the niche, it came later. I was like, oh, this is purity culture and this is diet culture. Like I was able to
yeah.
put it into that like marketing positioning language. But before that, it was just me trying to work through these things that I'd grappled with my whole life.
Mm. I can see so much of your story in this. This is very much a memoir, and it kind of like meanders through different parts of your life, and just the language that you give to things. Growing up as a male in fundamentalism, as I've talked to other people who have deconstructed, and especially women, I have been shocked at how different the experience can be
Mm.
in
Yeah.
the exact same church or the exact same circles. I'm going, oh, you all heard that. Or like because of the books you read and the stuff you were taught, it meant this to you. And I'm going, oh my gosh, that is so toxic. Like, I don't think a lot of guys realize how different the messaging can be for women in these circles. And I mean, there's plenty of harm for guys too. Like listening to the women has given me better language for myself as well. But can you go into a little bit of like what theology of food and bodies are you trying to push back against in this work?
Yeah. So I was growing up at the turn of the millennium. So that was the height of evangelical purity culture.
Uh,
And purity culture isn't just traditional Christian sexual ethics. It was very much like rooted in a time and place. It wasn't just a religious phenomenon, it was in politics too. It was a reaction to the AIDS crisis and the sexual revolution, but a lot of it was a reaction to the AIDS crisis. And it was this
mhm,
fear that sex could lead to disease or even death. So I'm growing up in this milieu we're being told like abstinence will keep you safe. And
mhm,
not just sexual abstinence, but like really just like shutting down a lot of things. Like just say no. Like when we think about that phrase, that came out of that time period too, that has to do with drugs. But like
right.
abstinence was really like the answer to all the ills and evils that were in the world. I went to a fundamentalist kind of Baptistic Christian school, and we often
Mm.
described ourselves as in the world, but not of the world. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, so we were like keeping ourselves pure and untouched in that way. And yet you can never actually be in the world and not of the world. And you can never truly be pure, especially if you
Mm,
believe you're a sinner.
mhm,
I was receiving all of these messages that often contradicted each other, like this idea that I'm a sinner and yet I need to be pure. And so I'm like trying to hold that in like trying to hold that tension as a young girl. And I don't feel like I was given necessarily good direction or scripts for trying to figure out that tension.
mm,
But the book is a whole, I mean, it's talking about the belief that the body is bad and the spirit is good, and how that belief has infiltrated the church. And that's not just a belief that's in the church, it's in like secular philosophy, it's Platonism, like that we are trying to escape this world into the spirit
yes.
world. It was something that came out of the Enlightenment, which was right after the Reformation. But this idea that the mind is what you want to privilege, like we are in the age of reason, and the body is something that is base or suspect.
Mhm,
So all of those philosophies and belief systems have found themselves in the church too, because it's in the larger culture. And that was certainly, those are ideas that I did not know I was grappling with as a child, but I was certainly being affected by.
I'm so glad you call that out because that's something that I try to bring up several times through the podcast is this division between sacred and secular, between physical and spiritual. Like the body is bad, anything physical is worldly and therefore evil. Like, that's early Christian heresies. You know, that's not what it's about. But it really has affected us so much that being embodied and just being able to pause and appreciate the physical without feeling any anxiety about the time I'm wasting for eternity, you know, if I just sit down and watch a TV show, like that's been so hard as I've deconstructed fundamentalism. And I think you really bring that to a focus in the book. Like I felt that anxiety so many times as I was reading your story and going, oh, this is stuff I don't think the average Christian realizes is what they're believing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're giving really good words to it. Like at one point, you said that any need you felt exposed inherent sinfulness.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I sat with that for a while because I'm going, oh gosh, I can totally see that.
Mhm.
You know, so how does that kind of theology train people, especially women, to distrust any need, any hunger, physical, sexual, whatever it might be? Is there any particular system that's doing that? Like, what is the theology that's causing that?
Yeah. I mean, so much of that, it's rooted in so many things, but I think of like self-help culture, like
Mm,
the self is this thing that always needs to be optimized, and there's always something that needs to be fixed. And a lot of
mm,
times the things that need to be fixed are the things that we want or need. We're trying to like somehow eliminate the things we want or need.
mm. The stuff that makes us, right? Like our personality
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of times I feel like self-help culture, like the ultimate goal is to create this like almost robotic uniformity. And
Mm.
yeah, it like, I mean, that's reductive, but I remember sitting in sermons, and I remember hearing sermons about idolatry, and idolatry is not just, you know, what they used to do in the Old Testament where they built these statues, and it's not even just really bad things like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It can also be like the good things. It can be like your family or the movies you like to watch, or and
Yeah.
the thing that's so tricky about this messaging is that there is always like a degree of truth to it, right?
Mhm.
But there's also this toxic messaging too. This idea that like if I'm enjoying something too much, I should probably think about whether or not that's a bad thing. This just constant turning over, nothing is as it appears, and you're constantly focusing on self in that sort of framework. You're
And then being guilted for thinking about yourself so much.
yeah, yeah, really vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying, I don't know if that answered your question, but this idea that like your wants and needs are inherently sinful, I think that messaging is very prominent in both diet culture and purity culture. Like
Hmm.
desire is something you almost need to shut down. You need to say no to it, either by like going on this new diet or this intermittent fasting cleanse, or you know, like signing your purity pledge. Like it's not something to interrogate or to use as information. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
That's good. And it's kind of like how you mentioned a few minutes ago, like the church culture giving you this cycle that you can't get out of.
Mm.
And it's saying you have to be pure, but you're also this horrible, rotten sinner. And I think we should ask a question when we're looking at our theology of, does this create both the problem and the solution that we just have to keep going in circles around? You know, it's kind of like how everything today is a subscription. They want to keep you relying on them. Like religion should be like back in the day where you just buy the product once and it gets you what you need the rest of the time, instead of this subscription where it keeps saying, okay, now you have a problem. Here's how you fix it. Okay, here's the problem again. It just keeps going
Yeah.
over like that.
Yeah. Oh, it's
Um,
such that's good. That's such a similar model.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have to flesh that out more. Think about that.
Yeah.
In the book, I want to put on a therapist hat for a second because you are talking about scrupulosity,
Mhm.
which may not be as familiar of a term for some people. So when we're talking about like OCD, everyone thinks about, you know, having the pencils exactly in a row or whatever, but it's having an obsession, something that you constantly have to do to feel safe, feel better, and you have this compulsion of what you do to achieve that in a way. And so there's a religious aspect of it, sometimes called like religious OCD, scrupulosity, that is very present in a lot of fundamentalism, but we don't always have the words for it. And I love how you say, my first obsessions were religious and my first compulsion was prayer.
Hmm.
So can you talk a little bit there about how these aspects of your faith actually were kind of OCD sort of things, where there was a whole psychological component going on that maybe we haven't talked about before?
Yeah. Like, so when you think of OCD, people usually think of hand washing, like the hand washing.
Sure, yeah.
You're afraid of germs in the outside world, and so you keep washing your hands, and germs are real, and there's nothing wrong with hand washing. But when you're doing it to the point where you're bleeding, that's a problem. Scrupulosity is like that, but in the internal realm. It's like you're aware that you're dirty, that you're sinful, and so you want to do something that will cleanse you, and so you pray, but it just never feels like enough. It's not rooted in connection with God. It's rooted in anxiety and fear, and
Yes.
this like constant distrust, this need to get it exactly right. And OCD is often referred to as the doubting disorder. It's like someone is perpetually uncertain that something will or will not happen. And fundamentalism, I think one of the key characteristics of it is that it really pushes that you need to be certain of what you believe, and you need to be certain of your salvation, and you have no doubt, and do you know for sure, and you can know for sure. And like,
Yes, absolutely.
certainty is a huge part of it, not faith. Like this sort of, and I don't know about you, but like the older I get, the more I learn, the more I feel unsure of everything.
100%. Yeah.
As you grow, like you realize how much you don't know, and you evolve and your perspective shifts. And so, but that's almost anathema in that kind of environment, to like, you have to just rigidly hold on to this thing. And if you're not a black and white thinker, if you I would argue, if maybe you're more intellectual, like you know that you don't know things. And so that messaging that you must be certain in order to be saved, that it is very anxiety producing when when you're a person who feels uncertain about many things. Yeah. And so I think that fundamentalism, if you are prone to OCD, I think that it kind of just pushes you even further into it. And then there are people who aren't prone to that sort of thing at all. And I think that they seem fine, at least on the outside. Maybe they need to be certain so they can't admit it.
Oh, it's so true. And the more you know, the less you know.
Yeah.
You just kind of made me think too, like as we're talking about these compulsions in having to constantly wash your hands, or they're never quite clean enough. Maybe I missed a spot, or the person who has to always check that the door's locked. I'm not 100% sure it was right. And it just made me think of how many times growing up, I was told I had to pray to confess sins, and how many times I would have to do that. Oddly enough, I wasn't the stereotypical kid that got saved 100 times.
Okay.
Somehow my one time was okay for me. I don't know how I escaped that, but it was the daily confession, and it would be the Lord, please forgive me for X. And then 2 seconds later, did I really mean that? I should probably pray it one more time. And I'm going, oh gosh, yeah, that is this religious OCD, this scrupulosity we're talking about. Because you can never be sure enough. And in a religion of certainty, you have to be sure that you're saved, that you prayed the right prayer, that your sins are forgiven, that you made the right decision, you're dating the right person. I mean, the list goes on and on. We can be anxious about everything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, it runs counter to so much of what the Bible teaches, and even things that like I'm sure you heard sermons about be anxious for nothing. And then you're also being told like, you should probably be anxious about all this stuff.
So true.
Cognitive dissonance is hard.
Yeah. And how does the dieting culture tie in with that? with like the OCD and feeling that anxiety about not doing enough or being enough.
Yeah. A lot of people who struggle with disordered eating often will get like OCD is often comorbid with eating disorders, disordered eating. If for me, the obsession was with my body. It was like, had I gained weight, had I eaten healthfully, had I exercised, like the obsession was that. And then the compulsion to get rid of it was to engage in dieting behavior or like exercise. And often for me, like to extreme measures that were harmful. But it's this obsession that fuels anxiety, and the way you relieve it is through the compulsion, which often to the outside world, in part because the waters we swim in are diet culture, like it often looks like, oh, this is just what like healthy, good people do. This is like discipline. But you don't see what's going on internally. You don't see the amount of headspace it's taking up, or the amount of just worry and rumination. That part is invisible to the outside world. It might just look like this is what you're supposed to do. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And half of my ads on the streaming platforms, it's for Weight Watchers or some weight loss drug, or Apple has been running those commercials for people not having their New Year's resolutions after the 9th, and they're running and being chased by a sofa or something. It's kind of a creepy commercial. Whoever came up with that, but it is just so much in the shared waters of our culture. And I'm thinking here, we should probably pause for a second, because our listenership is more familiar with the spiritual abuse and this scrupulosity kind of side of the conversation. But maybe not everyone is 100% what we're talking about with disordered eating. Maybe just in high school you learned about like anorexia or bulimia or something like that, but there's a lot more to it than that. So do you mind just taking a second and maybe giving an overview of what this can look like, so we're clear on that moving forward?
Yeah. So eating disorders and disordered eating, those are considered separate. There are different types of eating disorders. Anorexia, which is like food restriction to an extreme point, and bulimia, which is binging and purging. Binge eating disorder is also in the DSM. And then there's eating disorders not otherwise specified, which is, it's almost like disordered eating to an extreme, but it doesn't neatly fall under the categories of the others. So those are eating disorders, but then disordered eating is when people's relationship with food in their bodies, it takes up this negative anxiety producing headspace, and it is to the detriment of their physical, emotional, or like social lives. And Self magazine did a survey, I'm not going to say the number of what, it was a large survey. And they found that 78% of women will struggle with disordered eating at some point in their lives. And this is in part because diet culture is the water we swim in. And a lot of it's fueled by capitalism. Like we are being sold products by being told our bodies are problems that need to be fixed. And if you pay X amount, if you get off that couch and like we'll give you the solution.
Yeah.
That's not the only reason, but like women are really preyed upon in that way. And then there's also a moral and ethical component to it too. Like diet culture actually has origins in religion. The way we evaluate bodies is often rooted in our beliefs about like whose bodies are good and whose bodies are bad. One of the first diets that was created and marketed was by a Presbyterian minister. So there are all these complex components to it. But yeah, disordered eating is something that people don't often talk about. People will often talk about their diets, but it's very, very common still.
So it's very possible then for somebody not to have a diagnosed eating disorder, but maybe still have some disordered eating that is like not talked about, or they may not even realize that or have the words for it then, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I found that growing up in church, I never really heard food talked about with guys much. Maybe once in a while we would make a joke about, growing up in Baptist circles, all the preachers were overweight. That was about it. But it seems like that is much more talked about with the women in church. So is that something that maybe some guys might not realize is being talked about a lot more and combined with religion?
Yeah, I remember, I don't know if it was like this for you. Did you, in your circles, I went to a private Christian school. Were you often separated by gender when you received like Bible instruction?
Yeah, so I was homeschooled, but yeah, I still had the youth group and everything like that. And we didn't do a lot of those, but yeah, there were the occasional anytime sex, pornography, anything like that was brought up, and then a lot in Bible college as
Yeah.
well. We'd separate the sexes.
Yeah, I always thought it was interesting that we did, like, when I think back to that time, I was like, oh, it was so segregated by gender. And like, we were receiving very different messages.
Hmm.
And I remember looking at like the boys in my classroom, and you're a child, you don't know what someone else is struggling with. I know that they had their own struggles, but I would just like look at them eat lunch. I would look at my friends, like my friend beside me who would bring like a Slim Fast to lunch, and then the other
Hmm.
who, like, she's like really carefully tearing a sandwich apart, and like I would look at them and they're being so careful, and then I would look at the guys just like shoveling it in, and I would
Yeah.
be so jealous. And I remember thinking, like, they're not worried about this at all. Um,
Hmm.
but I think that in the circles I grew up in, we were receiving this message. There were sanctioned church diets that mostly women participated in at my church.
Hmm.
At my school, we received a little bit of diet culture instruction, but mostly we were being taught. I took a class called Grace and Dignity. It was a required class for middle school girls.
Oh,
And
lovely.
yeah, we were taught like how to be good wives and mothers and how to prepare ourselves for that. And it was a lot of like,
And you said this was middle school, right?
this was middle school. Yeah.
So we're talking 13, 14-year-old girls. They've just recently hit puberty and they are being taught
Yeah.
this is how to be a wife and mother. This is
This
how
is,
to diet.
yeah.
Oh gosh.
And we're kind of told like like the boys, they're going to have a lot of insatiable desires and they shouldn't act on them, but they might not be able to help themselves. They really are a bunch of animals. But
Yeah.
you all can be like the pure gatekeeping Victorian angels who like
Mm.
keep them in line. And so a lot of that messaging was like, boys were never told like it's okay to be insatiable and desirous, but we were given this message that like they probably will be and you need to keep them under control. And so there
It
was a
wasn't okay. It was just unavoidable.
right, yeah, this
Yeah.
is the natural, this is nature. What can we do? We can't fight it too, like, but you all have discipline and you all can be restrained and you can
Mm.
be modest and like all those like lessons in rigidity and like suppression. And so we're receiving those messages about our bodies and sex, and like it just lays very neatly over messages we're receiving in the larger culture about like food.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting that we've talked so much about purity culture and the effect that has had on evangelicalism and fundamentalism. But just thinking about how no one talks about sex more than evangelicals, right? Uh, and we made it this core thing for the guys. So then for the women, your whole job, because obviously you can never feel any kind of desire or anything, your job is just to make sure we don't stumble.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? Well, in a culture where we're making fun of fat people, well, obviously the only way you can be pretty is to be thin.
Mm.
And if you're being thin and pretty, like that is how you guard against the temptation for these guys, is so they don't focus on anyone else if you're married and all. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is so unhealthy. But we've just thrown some Bible verses on it and acted like it was biblical.
Yeah. Yeah, you're as a like a fundamentalist evangelical girl, you're receiving this message that you can't act on desire, you need to control men's desires, but also your ultimate purpose. What I learned was that like my ultimate purpose was to be a wife and a mother. So I had
Oh,
to somehow like attract a man, but not make him lust. But
yes.
but then once I nailed it down, like keep him. It's so much like you are not allowed very much agency at all, and there's so much
Hmm.
focus on like control, and your body is like the center of all of it. And so recovering from that is a lot.
Do you have any idea at what age you realized that you were just born into this thing where your body wasn't your own? I know that sounds biblical for anyone listening, but I mean that in the sense of like, okay, so you're born as a woman and you realize right away, oh, this is never for me.
Yeah.
Right now I need to hide this so no one lusts after it. Then one day I have to flip the switch and be the sexiest thing so no one takes this man away. Like, you never have any agency, you never have any control. How young did that hit you?
I feel like I realized it in college. I still went to church, I still went to Bible studies, but I was kind of out of this like very conservative fundamentalism, and I was experiencing more freedom, and I was grappling with like what I'd been taught, because I still wanted to obey God, but also like I wanted to enjoy my life.
Hmm.
I'm like grappling with the tensions there. And I feel like I started to get angry in college. Because I wanted things, and I felt like that, like, yeah, I realized like that I was created for a much bigger purpose than just to
Hmm.
serve these very rigid scripts to make these men in charge happy. like,
Yeah.
like I realized that like I had a soul too, and I was created for much more. So I don't know that I have the answers. I still don't have the
Mm.
answers. Like I don't I don't know if I ever say I believe in like living into the questions, but like I don't know that I have the answers. I hope that I'm moving toward something that feels like capacious. But yeah, but I feel like in college, that's when I really started to unpack it. Once I kind of stepped away from the box that I'd been in and I could see it from the outside, and I'm like, whoa, that was really tight. Like that was,
Yeah.
yeah, that was really a really small box.
And it can seem like you're following God, being biblical, doing the right Christian thing, but that's so incredible to think that it takes until you got to college to feel like an individual with worth, like created in God's image as well. Like, I'm not just here for somebody else. We've really missed something if it's taking you 18, 19, 20 plus years of your life to realize that should be one of the first things that we're instilling instead of something that we don't want you to get. But in church, if any kind of eating disorder or anything is mentioned, it's really often framed just as selfishness. You talk about this a little bit in the book. It's idolatry. I know, like, growing up as a teenager, I always struggled a lot with depression and anxiety, and I constantly heard, "Oh, suicide is the most selfish thing anyone can ever do." And it made me kind of think, like, oh, we are taking things that people are struggling with that they don't feel like they can talk about openly, and then calling them selfish for it.
Yeah.
What does that language misunderstand about these problems? How is it causing more harm than I don't think it's intentional. I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but well, what kind of harm is being caused by that language?
Yeah. I mean, that's so reductive, and it lacks so much compassion. And it also
Yes,
lacks the insight into how the environment that has been constructed might be contributing to those problems. It's
100%.
blaming. It's like, this is a terrible analogy, but it's like kicking someone repeatedly and they're on the ground and they're like, why don't you get up? You're just kind of lazy, aren't you? Like,
Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy, actually. That is what it feels like.
yeah, that's what it felt like. And so, I mean, we're all complicated. We sin and we're affected by sin. And I think that like reducing someone's very complex struggles down to this one thing and not considering what might be factoring into it, including, I mean, eating disorders have a biological component too. Like they're hereditary,
Absolutely.
just like depression and anxiety. Like women are most vulnerable to eating disorders at puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause. And could argue that that's because that's when bodies are changing rapidly, but there's also research that shows that it's because of hormonal shifts. And so like it's something chemical that happens in a person's brain. And so
not some, sorry to cut you off. I just want to make sure everyone's tracking along here. So you're saying this is not just something solely of the will. Like you can't just willpower yourself out of this all the time.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, and that's the problem with how we've talked about depression and anxiety in the church too, right? Like if you just pull up your bootstraps and just make the choice, a lot of this is like theological, this belief that like we can save ourselves and that, so it's reductive. It is not rooted in science, like to just say like, this is the thing that is making you, go through this painful experience. Yeah, I think that we just need to have a much more robust understanding. I think that like identifying people as problems to be fixed rather than as human beings who are worthy of like love and compassion, I think that's part of it too.
Oh, that's good preaching right there.
I'm not allowed to do that. No, I'm just kidding.
that was good Bible teaching right there. That's what that was. Oh gosh, but no, you're right, and I love how at one point in the book you're talking about fruit of the spirit, and this purity culture, this diet culture, all it focuses on is self-control.
Yeah.
We have this whole list of things that are supposed to be fruits of the spirit, and instead we just say, like you said, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's all on you. When the same church is also saying, oh, you're not good at anything, you're not good for anything, it's all God. So you're stuck in this impossible cycle where you have to rely on God for everything, but you also have to do everything yourself. So when we're just constantly given this message of, oh, it's self-control, just try harder, what kind of fruit does that actually produce? Like, let's go into a little bit of anxiety that system makes you feel.
Yeah. I mean, well, it produces the Protestant work ethic, like relentless work, this idea that like rest is suspect, and the way you demonstrate that you are worthy of God is by like constant hard work. And it produces exhaustion and pride. And you are privileging the people who are able to perform in that system, are able-bodied and they're healthy, and you are saying that the people who are most worthy of God's love are the people who can perform, and that's not what the gospel says. And it, I mean, I know that like this is sort of like the problem and the solution, but it creates this like hyper focus on the individual rather than like viewing us as a collective, that God came to save the whole world and not just individual souls.
Yes.
So there's a lot that it engenders.
You've got light bulbs going off in my head here, because it made me think of when I left the church that I grew up in. I had been there for 20 years, and there was all kinds of spiritual abuse, and it was not a great environment. And I had called out how this one staff member was very spiritually abusive, misogynistic, racist, and you go down the line, it's everything. I literally had 15 pages of definitions of spiritual abuse and then 7 pages of all the ways that he had lined up with that, right? And somehow I thought that church leadership would thank me for that. They did not. But one of the responses I got when I bring all this up is, oh, but he's one of the hardest workers we've ever known.
Oof.
And just you're talking about productivity here, like that's what matters. That clicked for me where I'm going, oh yeah, absolutely. Like I won't fight you on that. Dude's a super hard worker, but that doesn't make you a good person or a good Christian.
Yeah, but we've conflated the two, right? I don't know if you received this messaging, but I remember very clearly being taught that the way that you show that you're a good Christian is that you outwork the people in your work environment.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the way they'll know you're a Christian is by your hard work.
Yeah. Oh gosh, we rebranded Jesus.
Yeah. But so you were taught that too.
Yeah. I heard that for sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
My school was kind of associated with Bob Jones University, and they would always try to get us to go there. And they were like, like employers love Bob Jones graduates. Like they work
Yep.
harder than anyone on the planet. And I remember like kind of knowing that I was receiving some propaganda, but also believing that employers probably did. Like I knew that was true. I was like, yeah,
Mm.
these people are incredibly hard workers. They'll work themselves to the bone. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I in my high school homeschool was Bob Jones, so I graduated from their homeschool academy. So yeah, I've
yeah,
got the same circles in that way,
yeah.
and it makes me wonder too if that's part of why so many fundamentalist churches are so hard on women, because if all we're prioritizing is what you can do for us, and you have these women who are going well above and beyond with their families and taking care of kids and cleaning the house and cooking meals, and yada yada yada, all the stuff they do and don't get paid for. Well, of course, they're maybe not going to be able to do everything the church wants them to do, but
Mm,
we're still going to push them to do it. Or if they're not feeling well, or they're pregnant or whatever, and all of a sudden you can't do everything you were doing before.
mm,
No wonder you're not getting all the calls from church and people checking in on you because you're no longer as useful to them.
yeah. I remember my mom. I don't want to like tell my mom's story, but I remember that was
Yeah.
something she talked about a lot. Like she went through a period of depression after her sister died really young. And she
Mm,
talked about like when she was less useful, she felt like
mm,
she no longer mattered in the church. And
yeah.
yeah, I think, and that's a really painful thing for someone to go through. And I think it also can be a very clarifying thing. I think it was for her. I think that her
Mm,
theology shifted after that. Like, the scales fall from your eyes. Like,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
And along those lines, you point out in the book, I think you said this was not original with you, but I really liked this. It made me think for a while that in a culture of abundance, like we have here in America, we have way more than we need. We show moral superiority through abstaining.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of a brain explosion. So how does that logic shape the attitudes that we have, the way we address and approach food and bodies?
Yeah. I mean, the thin ideal is relatively recent, right? It
Yeah.
emerged around the time of the transatlantic slave trade, but like also that was the time of industrialization. We start having this abundance. Before that, like, I mean, people, it's going on these intermittent fasts and that being this thing that people in like high income households do, that it's like kind of a luxury thing to be able to do. Like whenever you
Mm,
are just trying to make it through the day and like you can't use your energy in such a way where you're not eating for X amount of hours. Like
hmm,
you have to put food on the table. You have to
yeah.
work multiple jobs. Yeah, and so you'll often see in our culture a lot of times like thinner bodies are associated as like higher income bodies. They're the people who don't live in food deserts. They're the people who can afford a gym membership. They're the people who live in walkable cities that are like higher income areas. And so the it it's like now that we live in this culture of abundance, we no longer like showing that we can resist is our way of showing superiority. Um,
Mhm.
and you'll see that too, like with how people approach money. I think, like,
Mm,
how people talk about like the new rich and the old rich. Like the new rich, you
mm,
can tell that they're newly rich because they're ostentatious and they flaunt their wealth. But the old rich, like, they wear plain t-shirts and drive old cars.
uh,
But that's its own way of showing superiority. It's saying like, I am so far
mm.
above needing all these things. Like, yeah, it's kind of this inversion of what you expect.
It's like the designer clothes for $1,000 that look like old tatted jeans or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting that we've commodified that, and that's crazy. So when we're talking about food and faith, one of the things that I have to bring up, being a Baptist, at least growing up as one, is potlucks, or dinner on the grounds, as we called it. Pitchins, if you're nasty. They can be some of the most judgmental spaces in church. And I never thought about this. Like, I will be completely honest with everyone listening here. I always look forward to those. I thought they were good times. And I never, even though I knew of disordered eating. I knew people who struggled with different aspects of it. It never really hit me how difficult that could be in this shared setting. So I'd love if you could take a minute and just go into how does food and especially communal food in a setting like that magnify the surveillance and scrutiny that's already there in these religious settings.
Yeah. I interviewed dozens of women for my book, and I asked them the question, how did your experience in purity culture impact your relationship with your own body? And so many women talked about potlucks,
Mm,
especially women who were in larger bodies. They would talk about how they felt like their morality was being scrutinized by what they put on their plates.
mm,
Like if they were able to restrain themselves, it was like kind of almost like an apology for their body. But
mm,
they felt very much like their inner character was being evaluated based upon what they consumed at these events.
wow.
And I was not in a larger body, but I remember feeling that too. Food was not just food, it was symbolic of other things. It was what I chose was a reflection on my character. It was never just food, particularly in public settings. I felt like I was under surveillance.
Mm,
That might have been imagined, but also I think that was some of the messaging we were given. I don't think it was totally imagined. And
no.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, a lot of women talked about intense anxiety, wanting to avoid the events altogether, restricting themselves, and then a lot of them described going home in private and then binging because they were hungry
Mm, oh,
and
wow.
even just like the anxiety of having to like repress or feeling like you had to repress and then like letting go. So I mean, it's an intense experience for a lot of, I won't just say women. I spoke to just women, but I
Sure.
would imagine like not just women, because it's not just women who struggle with disordered eating or eating disorders. So, yeah.
Very good point. And like you brought up with that, even if some of the anxiety is just perceived, like even if people aren't actually paying attention to you or judging you, we still have to ask the question, why are they feeling that way?
Yeah.
What about this system has got them to a point where they feel like what they put on a plate is going to have some moral consequence that everyone else is policing them on?
Mhm.
Like if we've gotten to a point as a church where people are feeling that way, we really missed the mark.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and it's not just in the church. I mean, this is a both and thing, right? Like we live in a larger world, and a lot of the messaging in the larger world, I mean, so it's both. It's not just in the church and it's in the outside world, but it has come into the church. A lot of churches have sanctioned
Mhm.
diet programs. My church did. The only time I
Ooh, like what? What would that look like?
I went to a Southern Baptist church and they used, it was called First Place. It was a
Mm.
Lifeways diet program. It was like oh, I don't remember the tagline, but like a pray yourself thin, like eat the way
Oh
Jesus ate
wow,
sort of thing. That might not have been the tagline. That's essentially what it
that's
was.
still the messaging in general. Yeah.
Yeah. But the only time I remember a woman getting behind the pulpit was when they would talk about like the First Place program. Like we're meeting at 6 o'clock for our First Place meeting. And it was like
Oh
a
wow.
diet accountability group and they did public weigh-ins and it was right by
Well,
the youth building. And so I remember seeing it was usually ladies, like there were like one or two husbands who were forced into it too, but they would have their meetings beside the youth group. But yeah, so that was part of my church coming of age, was seeing that like formally implemented. I don't know how many, I mean, it happens in a lot of churches. I was like, my whole world was church culture. And so I would go to friends' churches, and I don't think
mhm.
friends' churches had formal programs like that. But yeah, so it is in the church and sometimes very explicitly in the church too.
Mm. So if churches started to take embodiment more seriously as being an actual theologically good thing, what are some practical ways that you think they might be able to gather around food differently and not exclude or harm people that are having these maybe struggles beneath the surface?
I think that like not assuming that discipline or restraint is always the moral high ground. I think that
Mm,
sometimes like surrender and grace is.
mhm,
And so I think that cultivating an environment of like compassion and love too
mm.
is, I think that that can go a long way. And we can also like I don't know, at the beginning of the year, you know, all the pastors are preaching their New Year's sermons. I think that being conscious that just like trying to make ourselves be better people, like maybe that's not the most Christian message we could deliver at the beginning of the new year.
Yeah, it's a complete reframe for a lot of fundamentalists and evangelicals. But once you start getting out of those circles, and if you look into more like mainline or Catholic or Orthodox faiths, a lot of times they're not doing these topical New Year's sermons or anything like that. So
Yeah,
that brings us into a whole other realm of Christianity that's existed honestly longer than our circles did,
yeah, that's
and they know there's healthier approaches.
there's some beauty to having like a text, a shared text that
Sure,
one, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I want to make sure I mention this because I really love this. I believe it was toward the end of the book. You are contrasting body positivity, which we hear about in culture, body neutrality, which is something some of our listeners may not be as familiar with, and then body reflexivity, which I found really fascinating. So if you can maybe give a quick overview of that and talk about this grace that doesn't require micromanagement that we're trying to get to.
Yeah. Yes, body positivity, like, I mean, it sort of reached its peak kind of in the 2020s, but it's this idea that, you know, you embrace the body you have, you love the body you have, it's self-compassion, that sort of thing. That's been critiqued from various angles. Like people have talked about how that's hard depending upon which body you're in because size discrimination is very real. Fat phobia is the one like form of discrimination that has increased in the 21st century rather than decreased. So it's hard to feel positive whenever you're being actively harmed in the workplace or in social settings. And sometimes it's hard to feel positive when you have chronic illness or any number of things. And so body neutrality is kind of the stance that you don't have to feel positive or negative about your body. You can just try to treat it as like kind of approach it with non-judgment. And that's been critiqued too, because people have said, like, are we just not supposed to feel anything at all? Is that like,
Mhm.
is that how do we feel neutral about something as central to our lived experiences as our body? So body reflexivity is this idea that was posed by the philosopher Kate Mann, and she wrote the book Unshrinking: How to Face Fat Phobia. And she makes the argument that we should view our bodies as for us. And as someone who
Mhm.
grew up fundamentalist, that feels like heresy, like my body
Yeah.
for me. But really it's a complicated idea, but like the spirit in it is like this idea of non-judgment. Our bodies are not something that constantly need to be fixed or that need to be compared against other bodies. They're not in perpetual competition with other bodies. Like our bodies are simply for ourselves to enjoy and to do
Mm.
good work and to like our bodies are not, they should not be pitted up against all these other bodies. And I
Yes.
think that's a really liberatory way of thinking about the body and what the body is for. It allows continuum of emotions about the body. But I think that especially the focus on like non-judgment and non-competition. So much of evangelical culture, so much of a lot of the culture we're in, but a lot of it's competitive and hierarchical. And
Yes.
to think that like if we could somehow escape that that constant striving
Mm.
toward being the best version of ourselves or self-improvement, there's something really beautiful about that.
There is. I'm glad you worded it that way because I still have the fundamentalist preacher voice in my head, and whenever I hear something like, "Oh, my body is my own," and I always think of Paul going, "Your body is not your own." But what that's talking about in Scripture is saying to think of your body as being something that God created, as something special, unique. And what we've turned it into, because God isn't standing here saying, oh, let me use your body for this project I have, is we are giving it in service of other people in
Yeah,
ways that we were never called to.
yeah,
And I love how you say when you hear people talking about, oh, I learned that my body is my own or whatever, that's not unbiblical. It's them reclaiming the goodness that God gave us in our own embodied selves,
yeah,
and just refusing to lean into the judgment and the competition of the world that creeps into church too.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm. So let's say there's been somebody listening here that has been intrigued. Maybe they haven't heard this kind of stuff talked about in church before. Obviously, I would recommend Famished. You can get that anywhere books are sold. But what other resources might you recommend for people who would like to learn some more about what we've discussed?
Yeah. R. Marie Griffith's Born Again Bodies is a history of the religious origins of diet culture, and it's totally
Mm,
fascinating. And it's very readable too. It's an academic book, but it's very accessible. I would also recommend Kate Mann's Unshrinking: How to Face Fat Phobia. It talks a lot about
mm,
like size discrimination and where that came from, like the connection between fat phobia and anti-blackness.
mm.
That that's a really excellent book. Fearing the Black Body. I feel like I took a the off it. It's by Sabrina Strings, and
Okay.
it talks about like the way we've constructed which bodies are good and which bodies are bad and how much of that is racialized. That's a really fascinating book too.
Mm.
And then any of Hillary McBride's books, The
Oh,
Wisdom
yeah.
of the Body, yeah, she's excellent. Those have been very healing for me. Those are more accessible. It's not self-help. She's an academic, but it's more applicable to like daily practices in life. So those are excellent too.
Good, good. We'll link to all that in the show notes. This has been a really important conversation because as Christians, our focus is supposed to be on the overlooked in society, on the hurting, on the least of these. And instead, what I've seen in a lot of current Christianity is further marginalization,
Mm.
further mocking. We'll say anyone's welcome. We'll say, oh, well, we're not fat phobic, we're not racist, we're not anything, but the jokes we tell, the stories we tell, and we're not actually making room for people to be real, to be themselves, to talk about this kind of stuff. So, Anna, I want to say thank you so much for writing this book. You nailed what it feels like growing up in that. You taught me so much about what it would have felt like, from a female perspective there. I would definitely recommend anyone that wants to learn more about this and get in this mindset of what is this like? What's the actual connection between purity culture, dieting culture, all of this. Maybe if it stirred up something new where you say, I relate to some of that and I've never thought about it that way. Definitely make sure you check out Famished. We'll link to that as well. So Anna, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I want to give you the last minute here for you can share your socials, anything you're working on, and any final thoughts for the listeners.
Yeah, you can order Famished on food, sex, and growing up as a good girl, wherever books are sold. And then I'm on Substack and Instagram at Anna J. Rollins. And then you can find me at annajrollins.com.
All right. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. We hope we provided a healing place to discuss the questions you can't ask and the context you won't learn in church. If you enjoyed the podcast, would you take a minute to share it with a friend? You could also rate and review on your podcast app. If you'd like to donate to keep our work going, you can go to our website, thebibleuncut.com, and click on the Support Us tab. While you're there, check out the recommended resources and blog where we post show notes and other articles. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.